Operation Barbarossa, the full-scale invasion of the USSR by Germany and its allies, started on June 22, 1941. As the Germans poured into the Soviet Union across dusty roads, they captured town after town, village after village, and city after city. Millions of Soviet soldiers were taken prisoner. Jewish communities were wiped out, and partisan resistance was crushed mercilessly as whole Soviet settlements were razed to the ground. This was a war of annihilation. How did the Germans perceive this war, this so-called crusade to the east? What were their attitudes towards it, from the beginning till the first defeat at Moscow? In this video, more about the German perspective on Operation Barbarossa. Hey, good to have you back on the channel. If you're new, my name is Stefan. I'm a Dutch history teacher and I make videos about history for you. If you find that interesting, please consider subscribing and also hit that notification bell. In my previous video, I explained about the German attitude towards the outbreak of the German-Soviet War. Ordinary German citizens reacted to the first news with a mixture of shock, consternation, and lack of understanding. Within a week, reports and public opinion suggested a return of confidence. When the Germans took control of the city of Lemberg, also known as Lvov or Lviv, they found thousands of slaughtered Ukrainian and Polish political prisoners that were executed by the Soviet Secret Service, the NKVD, before they retreated. This was used to prove that the invasion of the USSR was a necessary crusade, because the base of this invasion was formed by Nazi ideology. Part of this ideology was the older German concept of Drang nach Osten, push to the east, and part of this was Nazi rhetoric. Lebensraum, living space in the east, with the goal of making Germany a self-sufficient empire and therefore subjugating the Slavic people. Most German people clung to the belief that the so-called Judeo-Bolshevist state had to be taken down. As for Hitler, he wanted an autarkic state and therefore had to secure Ukraine for grain and the Caucasus for oil. And as the Germans crossed the Eastern European lands, they believed they were here for an ideological cause, as one German soldier wrote. The country has been neglected and, in my opinion, is on the brink of destruction. It now becomes much clearer to me how those famines in Russia could have taken place, which had been a mystery to me until now. Seeing this and still remaining a communist is impossible. Even the most fanatical communist with common sense cannot stand by his judgment. One important aspect of the German experience of Operation Barbarossa was marches. Endless marches across the endless plains of Eastern Europe. See, trains brought them so far, but for the rest of the distances, they had to walk this. See, the spearhead of the German advance, these were motorized units, but the infantry, they had to walk these enormous distances. A very interesting work is written by Willy Peter Reese, a stranger to myself. Reese was a German poet and writer who was sent to the Eastern Front as a soldier in 1941 when he was 20 years of age. From his writings, it is proven that he was fairly critical towards the ideology of National Socialism. Yet, that didn't stop him to take part in Hitler's crusade. During his time in the East, he wrote a lot. And when on leave, he handed the manuscript of his writings to his parents. Now, Reese was killed in action in 1944, so he never had the chance to rewrite his writings, so to say, after the war was over, to say that he was just an innocent bystander. And he gives us a unique look into a mind of a German soldier during Operation Barbarossa. As he wrote, a vast plain unfolded outside a railway station, and the paved road led dead straight over low hills and fields. Straight, dead straight. That was the theme of Russia. Fields, corn stubble, and meadows slid past. Only very rarely a tree or a house on the horizon. The sun flared, dust whirled up. We carried our packs and rifles and marched in loose file under their weight. At the very first rest stop, we sprawled onto the dusty grass at the side of the road, staggered up upon the command to continue marching, and dragged ourselves onward. I started to fall behind. As evening fell, I would pass comrades insensible on the roadside, felled by a heat stroke or exhaustion. A little troop of us moved into a village, were allocated a barn, and lay down. We couldn't eat, barely drank, and slept in leaden fatigue. However, the Germans proved to be another destructive ruler. They initially were greeted as liberated by some of the Soviet citizens. Why was this? Well, if we take a look at the western part of the USSR, these lands previously belonged to the Second Polish Republic. Poland was taken over by the Germans. They attacked Poland on the 1st of September 1939, but 3 weeks later the Soviets also poured in. And they captured the eastern part, according to the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact they agreed upon before the invasion of Poland took place. Now, as the Soviets took control of eastern Poland, they established their oppressive rule. And countless of Poles, Belarusians, Baltic people, and also Ukrainians, they fell victim to Stalin's oppressive regime. Many were shot, many were deported. So when the Germans rolled in, they were greeted as liberated. How bad could the Germans be? German soldiers saw how religious rites were performed to bless them by using icons from their hiding places, since the Soviets banned religion to a great extent. Many former Soviet citizens offered bread and salt to their perceived liberators. The Germans themselves believed that they were doing good, but on the higher level, a far sinister plan was carried out, in which all soldiers would be dragged into the war of annihilation. In August, one German soldier witnessed the execution of partisans near a small watermill. They were shot in the back of the head one by one. The executions seemed to fascinate German soldiers. As one wrote, "It is a hard but just end, if you know what led up to it, and however much one may dispute the method. You have to see everything in order to know everything and to reckon with everything. What is that which we hang on to, and which is snuffed out and gone in a fraction of a second?" But also, ordinary Soviet citizens suffered greatly. The Germans, they lived off the land. They stole food and other items from the local population. Reese, he also wrote about this. "So we started taking the last piece of bread from women and children, had chickens and geese prepared for us, pocketed their small supplies of butter and lard, weighed down our vehicles with flitches of bacon and flour from the larders, drank the overrich milk and cooked and roasted on their stoves, stole honey from the collective farms, came upon stashes of eggs, and weren't bothered by tears, hand wringings and curses. We were the victors. War excused our thefts, encouraged cruelty, and the need to survive didn't go around getting permission from conscience." Now, the whole concept of living on the land was basically part of a larger sinister plan known as the Hunger Plan, which was part of General Plan Ost, which was a planned starvation of millions of Slavs. One big aspect of Operation Barbarossa, of the war by the Germans perceived Judeo-Bolshevist state, was the extermination of Jewish communities living in the USSR. These killings were performed by Einsatzgruppen, and these were often assisted by local collaborators. Think of Lithuanians and Ukrainians, and to a lesser extent the Belarusians. Yet it also happened that just ordinary German troops of the Wehrmacht took part in these killings or witnessed these killings. They sometimes witnessed these killings as so-called execution tourists, as we saw in Poland also in 1939. But what were their thoughts about it? See, it is one thing to be an anti-Semite, but it's another to approve the killings of hapless civilians. As one German soldier wrote in a letter, "The corpses which used to be thrown without order onto a heap have been sorted out, as well as possible, and lime has already been scattered over the 500 Jews who were shot. This isn't the place to go into detail about what happened here." Another German soldier, he wrote to his wife, 150 Jews from this place were shot. Men, women, and children all bumped off. The Jews are being completely exterminated. Please don't think about it. That's how it has to be. And don't tell R about it. Leave it for later. And with R, he meant their son. So what we see here is that the German writer, the witnesses in this case, they basically approved of the killings, but they are aware of the fact that the people at home aren't yet somewhat ready to accept this horrifying truth. Studies of German letters from the Eastern Front show that the fate of the Jews was either not mentioned at all or only peripheral. Did this mean that the German public wasn't aware what happened to these people in the East? Well, they were aware of it. The news leaked back via the man on leave and film that was sent to Germany to be developed. The whole story of what the Germans actually knew about the Shoah is something for a standalone episode. Not all German units transformed into mindless killing machines. An example of this occurred on the 20th of August near the Ukrainian town of Belaya Tserkov, where soldiers of the 295th Infantry Division made a horrible discovery. In an abandoned building, they found 80 to 90 Jewish children who were neglected and malnourished. Their parents had already been killed off by the SS. The soldiers of this division were horrified by this and asked their chaplains for help. Lieutenant Colonel Helmut Großkurt, he set up a cauldron, tried to save the children by protecting them from the SS and their Ukrainian militia, but to no avail. He was overruled by Field Marshal Walter von Reichenau, and thus the children were finished off by the SS. What fascinated the German soldiers were the female soldiers of the Red Army. They were seen as a symbol of the cruel and untamed women of the Russian steppes. In a German newsreel, they had singled out the women who looked the most Asian. Afterwards, the German public talked animated about these female warriors. At the end, most of them believed that these types of people were not allowed to live. Many Red Army soldiers that surrendered to the Germans were killed on the spot. Soviet commissars were also executed without a trial. It is a myth to state that most of the Red Army soldiers surrendered without a fight. No, in many cases they fought till the bitter end. And this surprised the Germans, as one German soldier recalled it and compared the situation to the First World War and saw the differences. What has become of the Russian of 1914-17 who ran away or approached us with his hands in the air when the firestorm reached its peak? Now he remains in his bunker and forces us to burn him out. He prefers to be scorched with his tank, and his airmen continue firing at us even when their own aircraft is set ablaze. What has become of the Russian? Ideology has changed him. The Soviet stubbornness obviously resulted into more German casualties. And eventually, when Red Army soldiers surrendered, they bore the brunt of their stubbornness. Soviet soldiers who happened to capture some unlucky Germans in the early days of Operation Barbarossa finished them off and left their mutilated bodies for their comrades to find. As a result of this, reprisals were carried out and soon gallows were erected in every village. And the violence spiraled out of control. Despite all this, the Germans did manage to capture millions of Red Army soldiers, as historian Richard Overy stated. Between June and December, the Red Army lost 2,663,000 killed in action, 3,350,000 taken prisoner. Most of the 3 million Soviet prisoners who fell into German hands in the 1941 campaign were simply left to starve to death behind barbed wire. Let's take a look at an account of a German soldier who was stationed at one of these POW camps. He was a well-meaning World War I veteran, and he was in charge of the kitchen. He tried to make the best of things, but this wasn't easy. And so you can imagine that there had to be beatings and shootings just to create order in the surroundings of the kitchen. I haven't had to play the policeman quite so much and didn't need to beat anyone down to the ground with a rubber truncheon or have anyone shot down. Nonetheless, there was enough that was appalling. Things got worse as winter approached. The World War I veteran, he was approached by a Russian soldier who said, "Hitler promised us bread and good treatment, and now, after we voluntarily gave ourselves up, we are all dying." The veteran, he had to admit, he was not able to feed all the prisoners. As requisitioning parties stripped bare the countryside, they soon came back empty-handed. And even worse, a typhus fever had broken out in the camp. He wrote, "Hundreds move in the camp around us who are dying of famine. Each distribution of food is a tragedy. The cravings become even greater till complete exhaustion and indifference set in." The World War I veteran also contracted typhus and died in a field hospital sometime later. Another German soldier was stationed at a POW camp in western Ukraine. His attitude was a little different. "And how miserable those men look, expired and ragged. It is certainly no fun to watch all of this, to be there. When it gets warmer again, they will try to escape again, and then you have to watch them closely again. I can only say that it is a terrible, lonely existence. We will probably stay here. We expect that. The intention is that 20 to 30,000 prisoners will be added. We have no rest at all." So this German soldier clearly prioritized his own misery over that of the wrecked prisoners. Given the fact that the prisoners are much worse off than he is, he's aware of their dying situation, but it doesn't seem to affect him at all. Let's take a look at the strategic side of the campaign. Hitler had plans to capture Moscow and Leningrad and occupy most of the European USSR up to the Archangel-Astrakhan line. Securing Ukraine with grain fields and the Caucasus with its oil was vital for Hitler's planned autarkic Reich. Army Group North advanced through the Baltics towards Leningrad. Army Group Center through Belarus and attacked Moscow, and Army Group South went through Ukraine and had to make it to the Caucasus. The Ukrainian capital Kiev fell on 25th of September as the Germans took hundreds and thousands of prisoners, but it came at a price. Kiev had to be taken street by street and was full of booby traps. On October 7th, Hitler issued an order that the surrender of Moscow and Leningrad was not to be accepted. By the end of that month, Army Group Center had become exhausted and everything seemed to be backfiring. Equipment was in disrepair, conditions on the ground were poor, and there was a lack of men. Soldiers were already living off the land, and now winter set in. Nevertheless, they were ordered to push on for Moscow. They were still sure the enemy was about to collapse, to judge by letters from the front. This was a view held by many ordinary soldiers as well, at least in the early going. Some hoped in August 1941 the best Soviet troops had already been defeated. As the Germans crossed the East European lands, they believed they were up to an inferior enemy. As Hitler had stated, "We only have to kick in the door and the whole rotten structure will come crashing down." This surely wasn't the case, and as winter set in, the situation at the front was deteriorating. As the Germans were driven away from Moscow, the picture at the home front was fairly grey according to the SD, the German Sicherheitsdienst, the German Secret Service. Letters were initially encouraging, but were now having a negative effect. Barbarossa had failed, and it was not the Red Army, but the Wehrmacht that was close to being shattered. The Germans had lost 918,000 killed, wounded, captured, or missing in action. That was 28.7% of the 3.2 million involved in the operation. The losses were so grave that it would be correct to conclude that the Wehrmacht never recovered. The Soviets suffered tremendously also, even worse, but they were able to replace their losses and also were aided by the Americans via the Land-Lease Act. Shout out to my patrons and a special thanks to Haley, Barry, Mark Littlehill, Janusz Josinkiewicz, Joanne, Justin Trembel, Peter King, Tanya Dixie, Henry Clarkson, Rob Park, Andrea Martic, and Fernando Lopez Ojeda. Now do notice that the history of Operation Barbarossa is huge. It was the biggest military offensive in history. So therefore, you know, there are perhaps things you missed out, and in that sense, maybe this video was a little bit too ambitious. But I'd love to hear from you. Are there some topics you want me to explore, especially regarding to the German perspective on the Second World War? If you want to support me, you can do so via PayPal and via Patreon. And hey, if you haven't seen the previous episodes about the German perspective on World War II, this video is a part of a playlist. The playlist, you can find that one right here. I want to thank you so much for watching this video. Leave a like. Do not forget to subscribe if you have not already. And auf Wiedersehen.